Hello, hello. My name is Jacqueline Velis. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the project manager of Conductor and also the public programs manager here at Powerhouse Arts. Thank you so much for coming by, for joining us for the first conversation of today, which is the last day of Conductor, so we're feeling in high spirits and also really excited for the future of all of these conversations and programs and performances. So if you've joined us since the morning, thank you so much for being part of that performance as well. Today I have the great honor of introducing our four esteemed speakers. They're coming from all over New York City and also from the Southwest. Thank you, Chanupa. So for today's talk, it is titled Collecting Indigenous Art, Ethical Stewardship. And from left to right, we have Chanupa Hanska Luger. We have, Rachel Martin. We have Kite, and of course, moderated by Candace Hopkins. Thank you all so much, and I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome. As was shared, I'm Candace Hopkins, and I am the executive director of Forge Project and also the chief curator there. We are located on Mohican territory, just 2 hours north, near Taconic, New York. We also have a lending collection of art, and I'll go deeper into that as the conversation unfolds. But I'm really happy to be here as part of this conversation with three artists that I deeply admire to talk about this topic and hopefully to unpack it, to question it, to speak more deeply about what collections can do better, what maybe they're doing well now, what are other models. But first, I'm wondering if we can start with Kite and have you introduce yourself, as well as speak about the kind of work you do and why.
Yeah. What time is it? Ampedu Washte, Suzanne Karamacha Pikushto. Oglala Hamacha Chante Washte Nape Chiusapo. I shake your hands with a happy heart. My name is Suzanne Kite. I make art under my last name Kite. I am a composer, a performer, an academic, and an artist. I am the director of Wíhaŋble S'a Center, which is a kind of my studio research center that I run at Bard College. I'm also co-director and co-PI of Abundant Intelligence's research program, which is a very large international research body that provides grants and support to Indigenous people, artists, researchers, scientists who are working with artificial intelligence in many capacities. And I make a lot of things, but things I really like to make right now are sculptures that are also scores. You can see them at the booth here with Bockley Gallery. I have scores that are on hide that are made of the dreams of musicians. So, thanks.
Gunalchish Ha'iadi, Yak E Yak Kwalgini, Rachel Martin, Yuhat Dusak, Shinget Ayhat, Sagwidi Shahit Yadi, NYC Yehat Yadi. Thank you for being here. It's lovely to look upon your faces in person. My name is Rachel Martin. I am Tlingit, and I live and work in New York City. I am Tlingit, and I am the child of a killer whale and eagle clan. I am also the creative director and curatorial for the Gotchman Family Collection, which is a private art collection based in New York with multiple locations across the US. And so I'm more above that, I'm an artist, and it's a really interesting position to fill, to be both an artist and in a position of leadership and influence in the collector sphere. So being here is extremely special to speak with all of these people because there's so much to speak about with this, and I'm honored to be with you guys.
Docha Maragua, Dishgag Nahudosha, Netwehudosha, I'm Chanupa Hanska Luger. I'm Awache, Dripping Earth Clan from the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes. I'm also Lakota. I am an artist, sculptor, performance. I do whatever is necessary to communicate an idea. And I have a lot of strange skill sets because of that. I live in Glorieta, New Mexico, but I'm from North Dakota, and I'm river people from that way. So who are you and why have you come?
Do you want to talk about the work that you do or not?
What's that?
Do you want to talk about the work you do?
Oh, I do work. I do a lot of work that is sculptural in its nature. I have a background in ceramics. But I come from a culture that has deep clay traditions, but they were lost for 100 and some years, just like that. And I've been interested in how do you survive a cultural practice deep into time. I've been thinking about time quite a bit recently. And I think the intersection of art and collector and institution, for me, I imagine you are all a part of a time capsule, and I'm a part of the process of sustaining culture far into the future.
Yeah. Good words to start us off. Thank you all. So this is a panel that's about best practices for stewarding Indigenous art as collectors and as collecting institutions. I think that's kind of provocative because I'd say that most practices of collecting Indigenous art have been highly unethical, like the most profoundly unethical relations you can imagine. So that means that I think the work that contemporary artists are doing and collections are doing to some degree, and institutions are doing to some degree, is reframing that. I'll share a little bit about some of what we do at Forge, because I feel like the practices that we put in place are very specific in relation to this. So at Forge Project, which is a nonprofit organization that's in, as I mentioned, Taconic, New York, we have a lending collection of contemporary Native art. Right now, there's about 180 pieces. It includes the work of Chanupa, Rachel, and Kite, as well as many other artists. And the reason it's a lending collection right from the outset was to use this collection in some ways as a form of leverage, to use it as a way of building knowledge, to use it as a way to counter the profound marginalization of Native art, particularly in mainstream institutions, and particularly within mainstream institutions in this very city. There's a kind of, I think, profound historical amnesia here that still feels thick, let's say, that I think we're starting to kind of slice into little by little. So one way that we've been framing the collection is as a place of building knowledge, a place of accessibility, a place that's really defined by and for Native people. We are a Native-led organization. But we do a lot of what we call administrative advocacy on purpose. So I'll explain what that is. So that means that we don't lend out work if artists aren't getting paid. And not just not getting paid, they have to be paid at the bare minimum wage standards. So Wage is an amazing artist advocacy organization that if you haven't heard of, it's a little bit similar to what's called CARFAC in Canada. So it sets standards for certain kinds of exhibitions and certain kinds of exhibitions in different spaces. We also, when we get borrowing agreements in, we do what we call, jokingly at Forge, a lot of redlining, kind of like this practice of redlining, because we've received borrowing agreements that are pretty surprising. They come in and they, number one, don't respect artist copyright, so they'll often sort of embed in these agreements the ability to use an image for any purpose, including, one of them was surprising, including to put it on bags or mugs that were sold in the gift shop, all without an artist's consent or even the ability to negotiate a fee. So that was kind of wild to me that this would be embedded in there. So we always redline that out. And that then we put the onus on the institution or the borrower to negotiate with an artist directly about those rights. So again, it's like, how can collections embed artists' rights in the values and ethics of what they do and what they practice? I think this is really important. We also never lend out a work to an exhibition without, at the very least, informing the artist. That's not exactly the same as consent. We tried first to always see if we could get a yes, but I think artists are busy, and so now, at the very least, there's the opportunity for a no. Like, no, I don't think that that's the right context for my work. We also deliberately focus on the work of living artists because so much of our histories and our practices has become trafficable. And trafficable in what I mean, and that is taken from our communities, it is our cultural wealth, but it's been turned into monetary wealth for others, and then trafficked, sold and resold, always to the benefit of the collector. And I'd say it's also not just about semantics. So we also consider ourselves not owners of the work, but stewards. Stewards implies different protocols of care. So with that as a bit of an introduction, I'm wondering, if we can begin by with Chinupa first, with this question of, are there examples in your practice or in your relationship with collections or collectors that you feel like have set some ethical frameworks for how your work is owned or stewarded in that space? And if not, why not?
Forge does a great job. I do like the ethics of care. It seems so simple. So I'm surprised that there's an effort to redline that sort of generosity and care, in general. I think a long time ago. I'm 47 now. I've been working in the industry for a while. My mom is a sculptor, so I grew up in the kind of like native art wake. I joke around with some of my peers that I was a booth baby. Like, grew up underneath the table that my mom sold artwork at, listening to collectors of that industry, asking the same question to her over and over and over again, not knowing that the next person was going to ask the very same questions, and then bartering for her work, trying to find it at the cheapest deal. It stained me, in that sense. And I think through that, I started to just think about my art work as a byproduct of, like, the actual object, the thing that is a commodity that can be collected and presented as a byproduct of the art. And the art is the practice, the skills developed. The work can show those skills applied, but I think I retain the art, Hopefully it teaches somebody else. And I can't think of, I think I gave up on the ethics of collection, early, because of these industries, and to protect myself, like, I want to be able to recognize that the art grows with me and that it's not pieces of me out there in the world, but rather parts that I could sever, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Rachel, you have a unique position. You're an artist, but then you're also the creative director of a private collection, one that is also embedded with very particular kinds of ethics. So I know that you have lots of thoughts on how you're trying to shift things using that as a medium.
Yes. So I mentioned it before. I'm the creative director for the Gotchman Family Collection, which shares the founders with Forge, which is Becky Gotchman and Zach Foyer. So our ethics when it comes to ethical stewardship are very much aligned with Forge because they share similar roots. I think my role on this is really influenced by being an artist and being having the responsibility to not only the overall art ecosystem, but definitely to Native people in general, and making sure that artists have a voice in this all the time. And there's a tremendous amount of power that collectors have that is something that I've reluctantly stepped into as in my position. I think Becky Gotchman really understands that waiting for institutions is really not enough. Institutions will not move with the better, like when it comes to that, institutions are just catching up, and this is a constant thing where they're like, it's a slow process. But that's not necessarily the truth. It really takes a few small people to influence that world in a tremendous way. Native artists have been excluded from major museum exhibitions, acquisition budgets, permanent archives. And so this is where private collectors can step in and really bridge that gap with their power. Private collectors can serve as early believers, financial stabilizers, and even cultural stewards, which a lot of artists won't even be able to meet institutionalized status until if they don't survive in that meantime. So private collectors are really the seed, and then museums follow that. And that's where it's just, there's so much power that comes from influence. And I think while I was growing up, I really associated money with dominance. But in the last couple of 10 years or so that I've been a part of the art world, I really am seeing that money is more of an influence of narrative. And so it's a really important position for private collectors to listen to what the needs are of the artists that they're representing, as opposed to, I'm off subject, but.
You're still on it.
Yeah. It's something that I take very seriously, and I'm a super humorous person, so I'm constantly looking for the humor in things, but it's serious business, and it's very important that the people that are in these positions of leadership are taking this very seriously so that artists can have fun and feel protected and safe all the time. Because there's just a definite lack of safety, especially in this world right now. And Native people particularly don't feel safety when it comes to collections, because historically this has been a very, not a good relationship. So it's something that is never lost on me. But as an artist, I want to have as much fun as possible. And I think that my position is really a place where I look at it like I want the artists in our collection and all artists to just feel safety in that transaction, which it is always a transaction. And that is something that the idea of exploring ways of losing that transaction is really exciting to me. And I think that there's a lot of thinkers right now that are looking outside of the box of a transactional exchange, because ideas and all of the incredible things that art offer are so much more beyond an object. And so I really love this panel, but it's also so neat that we're in a stage where we can maybe even think outside of just collectors and really moving into like co-stewardship and co-acquisitions and these ideas, which ownership is not so set. And I would love to leave on that because I'm going into like something that'll be talking for 20 minutes.
I'm glad you talked about the ability to think kind of beyond not only transactional relationships, but conventional ideas of ownership. Because I was thinking in preparing for this panel, like, what are those examples out in the world? And I think that they do exist. I know that they do exist. And in fact, I think that they're being led by Indigenous artists. So This was a few years ago when a work by Edgar Khalil was acquired by the Tate Modern, and he would not allow themselves to own it in a conventional way. So in the contract, it is technically only stewarded by them, and I think it might have a time frame on that stewardship. And there were also strings attached. So it's a piece that has protocols of care included with it. It is a series of stones that then have fruit that has to be set on them like an offering. So that means that there's a kind of onus for the institution to take that on as well. And I thought that that was an amazing challenge. But then many years before that, there was an example that I still think about, and it really compelled me to want to work with this artist. So it was in 2012, and the only person who's going to be tired of this story is probably Raven, because he's heard it many times, and he's my husband. But the artist Bo Dick, who was Kwakwaka'wakw, he was an amazing cultural navigator. And he always had a few galleries that he would kind of pit against each other, because he would never kind of be exclusive with any single one of them. And I thought that was a great way to move through the world. But one of them, he had a solo exhibition on, and it was in Gastown in Vancouver in British Columbia. And midway through the run of that commercial show, he took down all of the masks that were on the wall, left the sculptures that were in the center, and they were all part of the Atlakim series or the Forest Mask series, because they had a broader purpose and they had a broader social responsibility back in his community. So he removed them from the wall, left the walls bare, took them back to Alert Bay, which was his adopted home, and they were used in a potlatch ceremony. And as part of the ceremony, he invited the various galleries that he works with, the gallerists. He invited other artists, he invited his friends. Of course, there's also folks there who've been formally invited from other nearby Kwakwaka'wakw communities to be witnesses as well. And a number of those masks were burned. And what I thought was so incredible about that was also this refusal to allow them to be part of that cycle, to be part of the commercial cycle. But in doing that, to also underscore that this role that they have, this social life, is perhaps a very different kind of responsibility than it had they entered a private collection. But it was also a demonstration of what those collectors could not have. And I think it creates desire, and he knew that. It creates desire for a market, creates desire to make more. But then the thing that he shared as well is that when these masks are danced 4 times, and that doesn't mean that can take many, many years or even decades, that there's the obligation to remake them. And that obligation falls on not just Bo himself, but the people that he was working with, his apprentices too. So I thought about that because there was both, he would participate in the commercial world, but challenge it in various ways and challenge conventional ideas of ownership, and I thought that that was absolutely necessary. And I wanted to turn to you, Kite, because you work in various forms. You also work as a composer. Sound is often a thing that's like highly fugitive as well. You have work here in this fair. So I'm wondering also if you have examples or examples that you look to in terms of what are protocols of care? Are there examples of ethical collecting? And if not, what needs to change?
Well, I think it's interesting to be on this panel about collecting when I've only sold 5 works ever. not because I've refused anybody. So that's interesting. I don't have so many opinions about collecting itself. I have yet to form many of them. I've had a few times to be deeply wronged. Could talk about museum installation maybe more intensely. But I think that one of the things that I think about, I mean, I've had the honor of having a few really good people buy works, and like Forge and Molly Gotchman, and I think Okay, yeah. And I really feel like actually going through the process of selling Alicia Wormsley and my public artwork for Cosmologyscape, these benches to Molly Gotchman, I actually learned a lot from their lawyer, who was deeply invested in making the most ethical contract we could possibly come up with. And in that way, I learned a lot, and from also being very hesitant about legal language that is often wielded against our communities. Policy is a term that I think signifies made-up rules within institutions, the word policy, as someone deeply ingrained in many institutions. And but legal language, I feels like if you have the right partners, it can be your friend. And Sarah Biscaradilli and I talked about this. But when I think about collections, I do engage with collected works of Lakota-made collections. So the St. Louis Art Museum, I spent some time engaging with, and it's a very large collection of nameless, anonymous beadwork and quill work, definitely made for sale, because you can tell because the moccasins have never been worn, they're beaded on the bottom. And dealing with, because once the collections are collected and then their future they go somewhere. There's a life beyond the time of the lives of all these people. And so I spent I'm gearing up to work with Counterpublic in St. Louis in the fall, and I tried very hard to work with this collection, the St. Louis Art Museum, and they said no, we don't. I'm supposed to do a whole project with these, and they canceled the whole program out from under me because they didn't want to fund it. And it really is heartbreaking to deeply engage with the dreams of my people, and then watch the collection be physically located in the museum as far as you could walk into the museum, first of all, and then to cancel the contemporary, not a very expensive program in my opinion anyway, the cancel that engagement to let that collection and those dreams be relived, be heard. And I think that's part of the I believe deeply, and that's why I have to kind of be an academic as well, besides working with museums, is I believe in complexity and making complex work that is audible is often difficult to collect, and like you said, and it's fugitive, but I refuse to give that up, and I agree with Chanupa about this. It's the act of the practice, the methods of making that become the artwork, and therefore I have to come up with ways to put them on the wall, and that makes for a very challenging engagement, but I refuse to give up on complexity.
Yeah. You set me up for the next question, and anyone can engage with this. Chanupa, you kind of framed it as well, is how do you negotiate your work being collected? Does it feel like a part of you is being owned by someone else? What does it feel like to see it in other hands? How do you find ways of maintaining agency in that relationship? How do you do it?
I'll start, because I have a pretty complex relationship with my own community and protocols that are surrounding the imagery of our work. Tlingit, clan imagery is very specific, and it is, a lot of the work that I have feminizes Northwest Coast art, and that is something that elders are very excited about, because a lot of the work that I have is influenced by imagery that they would have seen before computer-generated items or imagery. But there's just so much discussion, and my work opens dialogue for whether this is right or not, and then definitely where is this work going and whose hands is it going to be put into. And these are all really relevant discussions. I'm a Tlingit Yucatangui student, so we have these discussions in our language class, which is great because it's not like it feels casual, but it's a constant discussion of where is this work going and what is its purpose. And in a lot of ways, I've gotten permission from elders and people from multiple generations in my community after telling them where it is going and what the intentions are behind the work. I don't intentionally break rules, but I definitely like to bend them in certain ways, because a lot of the work that is celebrated in the contemporary art world is dominated by men. So I have purpose when it comes to bending the rules, and I think that answering to your community for the direction that your work is going is super important. And I'm in such a unique and beautiful position to be able to talk to elders right now and our young people in one group. But yeah, I get a lot of guidance for the work that I'm doing, and I'm really grateful for that, because living in New York, I'm definitely not in Alaska, so I'm not going to hear all the shit talking, which is important. Shit talking is love. There's criticism from your people is really important. So putting yourself in the position as an artist to hear from your community is really important, and I don't know if a lot of artists do that, but the really strong ones do, and so that influences my relationship. If that answers, I'm not a good answerer.
You're
I'm
doing
really
just fine,
bad at
Rachel.
it. I go in every direction outside of it, but I hope that helped everyone.
I sell work. I've got work out there. There may be people in this room who have some of my work, I love sculpture. I love sculpture because it is a hard sell. And it takes up space. I am that is land back, that is, every inch of a sculpture in a collection, in a museum, in a sub-basement somewhere, that's native land, this is the challenging thing with sculpture and collections. The challenging thing is that I deal with the most expensive real estate on the planet, which is your space, inside of the home, inside of the museum. It takes up physical space, and I love that about it. I'm happy when it gets collected. I'm happy because it is inch at a time, If I had my way and my capacity to do so, it would be fence posts, throughout. It would be an anchor point to actually recognize that this land belongs to the land itself. These objects are made of dirt, they're made of metal, they're made of textiles, they're made out of the materials that we harvested. Most of my work is made out of the trash of our society, things that don't know how to go away, plastics and byproducts. I'm like, why are we using that for throwaway goods when we can use it to hold cultural context, something that should last forever, A lot of my work, and I love this too, protocols of care is the shit talking. I don't know how many artists are subject to that level of critique from the people you care about the most, your community. They keep you in check in a way that is such a gift. I work in make-believe, just like everybody else here. This is all made up, and we've agreed to it to this point. The architecture we're in, was it actually a powerhouse? Who cares? Who cares? Because now it's real power, That it just burned fossil fuels for a while, But that was finite, I think art and culture in particular, it's our responsibility as artists, it's our responsibility as collectors, it's our responsibility as institutions to hold on to that which is most valuable, but to recognize that this collection model is based on preservation, and culture is maintenance, you know? We gotta take care of things. So, like Kite was saying, these things were designed to be sold sometimes. These objects, no matter whether it's a preservation model or a maintenance model, these are transmissions. And we don't know who our audience is. We know who's collecting, we know who's holding on to it, but there's a generation we will never meet who will see this work and receive the transmission, you know? And I think that's far more important than anything else. And I don't know what the monetary value of that is, you know? I don't think there is a monetary value. I know my work costs more than my community can afford, you know? I know that. But in the far future, it will be sustained through all of this to communicate to those generations that I will never actually meet directly. If everything goes to plan.
So my work can take up as much space or as little space as it needs to. I'm really into making stone scores, so they're, and anybody in my community can make one of these scores at any time, actually. I mean, they can't make the precise ones because they're made of usually my dreams or the dreams that I've arranged out of these symbols, and only I had that dream, or the group of people I facilitated have had that specific dream, and so when it gets assembled, and I think museums love to show my work because I'm like, oh yeah, it could be 3 feet. Oh yeah, it could be 20 feet. Oh yeah, it could be 6 feet. It can shrink, or it could be the size of an entire city if we're going to place stones all throughout an entire city, and see them from very, very, very far away. And but the flexibility and the specificity, I think, is what makes it complex. And I feel like now when I negotiate making things that are for collectors, making works on hide and beading on hide and arranging these scores for future musicians on hide, I'm finding ways that I can mediate these dreams enough so they're no longer dangerous, because dreams are powerful and dangerous, and I want to mediate them enough so they can leave me and safely leave me. But I actually do miss them. There's some works that I have in other places that I miss, and I wish I had back. Well, not back, but I miss them. I wish I could go visit them more. You know, things that I've spent, I think I'm specifically thinking of these constellations that I beaded very intricately. And right now I'm working on figuring out how to for the first time, sell one of these flexible stone scores. And the way I'm negotiating the future of it is that I have first right to play it, and if I'm not available to perform it, then I want to be able to either pick the musicians or suggest an instrumentation for the future, because I like some instruments more than others. And but the way that I'm thinking about dreams and dreaming and Lakota semiotics is that it's a form that needs to be preserved. So yes, there's this level of preservation, but also I'm absolutely thinking about ways that my work can move into the public realm and speak to many different communities at once, that one can meditate upon if one's thinking about their own dreams, tools, facilitations to bring us back into, and I think the thing I'm really interested in having the work leave my presence sometimes I'll probably never see these works again, is the possibility that I don't want them to be misinterpreted that like all dreams are good or all Lakota work is sacred and perfect or that all, that there's some sort of goodness, but that there's a complexity. They can be awful dreams. Yesterday we heard an awful dream performed, which was really fun. Because terribleness is like, is important too. The terribleness of something is important, and so that's what I'm navigating, is trying to continually figure out how to retain complexity in something that leaves my sight.
Thank you. I'm really intrigued by this idea that a work in a collection, particularly one that takes up a lot of space, is a kind of land claim. I think that's a great idea.
I wanted to respond to that because it's something that I'm influenced by with my work in terms of working in paper and pushback from institutions that I should be making painting or bronze or something that's like has a material object that will last a lot longer. And my interest is never in taking up space per se. It's making sure that your brain thinks differently. And that's like not taking up space, but occupying what your mind is. And I think that you also work in that same way in terms of just changing the perspective that somebody has. But I absolutely respect taking up space too. But that I think that coming from, there's so many different directions that artists are coming from. And I really admire that you are just saying that way too, because I never thought about it, but it's also, I really love the idea of making work that is impermanent and that you have to appreciate it in this very like small moment that you have it, or even like, I think my most powerful work is quite small, and I love that idea, but there's only, your work is super powerful, but yeah, it goes away, and you just have to experience it in that moment, and then it's completely gone, and then it's just people talking about it, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, that has its own power. It's like, how do you stake a claim in someone's mind or memory too, right? Exactly. So before we gathered here, we were sitting on the chairs over there, and Chinupi asked a couple questions, and I wonder if we can respond to them. And you said a couple things. You said, will there be a fully Indigenous art collection? What do you mean by that?
Well, I keep thinking about the power of a lending institution, the power of a collection to influence the track and the path that institutions value, museums and all of these sorts of things. I think about specific collecting groups that are collecting contemporary Indigenous work. It's strange. I mean, I'm thinking like 2011, somewhere in there, 2010. There was this moment, I live in New Mexico, I live in Santa Fe, which when I went to school there, and I grew up going there with my mom for Indian market. We literally left North Dakota to move to New Mexico because that was the only place there was a market for Native art in the United States. This is late 80s, early 90s. And that influence, because there was a market that was generated for Native people, it became like a ceiling, you know? Santa Fe became this apex of where Native art was bought and sold and collected and traded. And it moved my whole family off the reservation, out of the river. We're river people, and I'm living at 8,000 feet way up in the mountains. Like, I'm 6'3". I am the wrong physical design for New Mexico. Phenotypically, just my height, I'm moisture wick, like it doesn't make any sense. I'm definitely not mountain people. And the rivers there are small, you know? Even though it's the Rio Grande, I'm like, if you could walk across it, it's a creek. Dude. But I'm thinking about the power and the impact of that market shifting dramatically. 2010, somewhere in there, I think a few major collectors died. I noticed this because I work in clay, and clay in particular, there was native ceramics got a way better price point than ceramics in the general art world because of this generational knowledge that was kind of passed along, because it was valued as both an art object, but also like an anthropological, I don't know, like a Rosetta Stone, you know, or something. Some sort of way to describe and maintain a deep time relationship to America. And I think that's what that market was built on, was people being visitors to the United States, people feeling displaced and wanting to belong in some sort of way, and trading belonging for belongings, you know? That's what that whole market felt like. And because that market was designed to satiate that demand in the collector, they wanted to reproduce romantic versions of us in their mind so that they had an anecdote to talk about their deep time relationship to place in these series of objects that I have in my home. It's so different now, you know? And at that pivotal point, a few collectors died. Their collections filled every single museum in the Southwest. And living artists were competing against their own work being sold on the secondary market. The economy of this was insane at that time. In order to stabilize the market, they boycotted native ceramics for a year during Indian market.
Who boycotted?
Collectors. And I don't make Pueblo pottery. I make ceramic sculptures, but I was affected by this because they were made out of clay.
Sure.
It was the weirdest thing, but I was like, that feels like a canary in the mine, you know? I was like, if this can happen at this industry, why can't it happen at the higher levels of collection, you know? At what point do people exterior from the culture itself get to decide what has value and how they need to stabilize that, and how does that affect people taking care of their families, making artwork, you know? This is so complicated, you know? And I think we're entangled in a sort of way that all of this was like cloak and dagger, you know?
Yeah.
I saw an email that I shouldn't have saw, you know? And now I'm telling you all years later, so we're all in the know. But I think there's something really strange about that, you know?
Well, I think that what you're talking about, too, is there was a great deal of control that was held in private hands, particularly in the Southwest. The thing that I felt like, if anyone has been to Indian Market, I used to be a curator at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, which is there on the plaza in Santa Fe, is that, I don't know, it was a great sense of longing because in many ways I knew what I would see, which I thought was so extraordinary at some of the booths, I was never going to see again because it was going to disappear. And it wasn't necessarily going to museums. Or if it was going to museums, you might see it like maybe in a decade or something like that. But what I also saw happening is that, and this was being encouraged at the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is a great art school, but it was where you saw collectors' desire and interest being then mirrored in the work that was being produced. So it became this kind of like wild cycle of representation and actually self-representation coming in the work itself. But then you asked another question, Chinipi. You said, you know, when you were asking about this question of, will there be a fully indigenous art collection? You know, we said that it was like, but there is in many ways, and you know, we all have them, but they're done through relationships. They're done through trade. They're done through gifts. They're done through trades with other artists. It's a very different thing. It's not like, it is a transaction, but it's a different kind of transaction. But it's not a kind of collecting to display or to create, or maybe to kind of like fix, as I think that you said, which I think is very perceptive. It's like, there is a thick layer of historical amnesia in the United States, and sometimes these items become that way for someone to think that they have a connection to place or to sort of fill that void. But to close, Rachel and Suzanne, would there be a value in a fully Indigenous art collection? Does it exist? What is that potential? What would it change?
This sounds like my other talks where I have to talk about fully Indigenous AI and data stacks, where I'm like, well, all we have to do is just filter out the non-Indigenous data, and then we have a fully Indigenous, we just delete it, and then there we go. I trained the whole model with Indigenous data. I did it. But I love this idea that in our personal homes, we do have very fully Indigenous. Well, I have a couple friends. I got some work by non-Indigenous people. I got like one or two hanging on my walls. But my home is filled with my friends' work that I love. I have a lot. I guess I will push here. I will say I have a lot of. I like to collect my values, which are people human beings who I trust and respect and have traded artwork with. I have their work on my walls, and I have a lot of Native women's work on my walls. I think that if I want to say one thing on stage here, it's that American Indian women still have the worst statistics in all the collections, still have the worst statistics of sales, still have the worst statistics of being uplifted for major grants and major awards, and that is absolutely the truth. And so when we go to collect and we go to look and we want to be doing good work and with our funds, it's really important to be uplifting women and the work of women. And I think that's something that Rachel and I share a big, really value, is saying that. And I'm gonna collect more of my friends' work. Hey, you got anything for sale?
Trade?
Trade you?
Made me laugh, and so I lost my powerful thought about the whole thing. I'm gonna say that it's in my specific community, the idea of collecting and accumulating wealth isn't really or accumulating objects aren't necessarily the goal. It's really to have longevity to your traditions. And so inherently, I feel like an Indigenous collection sounds incredible, and I would love to see what that looks like. And I would love to be included and have my work in that. I would not want to be a part of the mechanics of it, because that's a lot of different protocols, and it's a lot of politics behind that. And also, it shows very much that we're in a place where we're in the infancy of Indigenous work that is being celebrated. And we're on a stage with all of the people that are included in that, myself, which is really powerful, but it's the infancy of it, and it's really, there is not an Indigenous collection that is completely run. And we're as close as we can be, and there's really neat ideas that are being floated, and it's a really neat experiment on what to do. Forge was an incredible initiative for all of that, and I feel lucky to be in a place where we are shaping what that might look like, and having discussions about that. But inherently, I don't like having objects. It doesn't make me feel good. I think art collecting and art in general is one of the oldest wealth strategies in existence. So the way that people interact and collect it is really, I don't know. I'm just thinking about these things, and I should have a stronger opinion about it, but I can't say that I do.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. I think by way of closing, I was just reminded of, in our culture, there's this figure of wealth woman, and you can encounter her, but embedded within this figure is that wealth is not something that you can hold on to, and you should not. It can cycle through you. It's actually, it's actually more important that you have the obligation to give it. So I think a truly Indigenous art collection would only ever be temporary because it would always have to be in motion, from that sense of protocol. So maybe I'll leave us with that thought. But thanks to Suzanne and Rachel and Shanifa for joining me on the stage. Thanks to Conductor. Thanks to all of you.